You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hello, everyone. You're listening to Trace Elements Radio, and we are live once again on Wednesday, and it is 6 p.m. EST. I love being here in the evenings. There's sun outside, which is awesome. It's so nice that it's staying out later. You know, that we have some sun and some weather. It's kind of changing here. We officially have spring. So, last week, if you had a chance to listen in, and if this is your first time here, welcome. I'm so pleased that you've come to join us. I was talking about the rites of spring. You know, this is my time being an April baby, that in the spring, I suddenly feel better. Most people do. You feel better, you're stronger, you start feeling sexual. But what do we do with this energy this time? Predators. I've been thinking about this often because, you know, as I've told you, I was backing away from Facebook. I went back on Saturday, I think, to say hi to my family because they're all very religious, different religions, but, you know, they imbibe in the sacrament of one God or another. And the first thing I noticed was I was attacked immediately. First of all, because I've been taking people off my Facebook pages. I even left my own page on Facebook, other than my family page. I'm stepping back. I'm no longer sharing the horrific news stuff that I used to. And because I guess I have betrayed the tribe, that now I'm seeing people react differently. And this is what we must look at today, I'm hoping, because we're going to talk about frequency and the frequency wars and the frequency harvesting. So much so that literally it almost killed me. This is what I've been suffering from as much as anything. There's a variety of agendas, obviously, going on right now. But the current system that we're under would like all the humans to be at their command 24/7, making them robotic and reactionary without thought, just in a stress state of anger, bitterness. People feel betrayed. They feel harmed. The dream machine is working. Now, in this, how do I even discuss this? Normally I write this all down so I could say it to you exactly, but I'm flying from the seat of my pants more than I normally do. Time is not linear. What we are seeing now, we have been foretold. Why? Not because it happened just in the past, because they knew it was coming now, and it did happen in the past, because it rotates. These things, what was before is now here. We are replaying a certain structure. But there are two factions of leaders. Of course, one we all know, the older one, I am an ant before this great God, and I'm a humble servant, and you get on your knees, and you suck a little sacred wine or something, and you become slave to that thing. But the new ones are all about frequency. And we know this. We know for a fact, and this is not fantasy, that they play frequencies in Holland and the UK, and I think 3 or 4 other places in Europe right now. I'll have to look them up later. They play frequencies outside of malls so that teenagers won't hang around. Teenagers don't know this is happening. It affects them. It makes them not hang around outside the malls, so they just leave. We know for a fact that there's clothing made, and if you get a chance, go to TraceElementsRadio.com, and you will see that there are clothes being made that harvest frequency, so that you can go for a walk, because, there's static electricity. We create a lot of energy, as we know, these things, but, of course, a special cloth as well, so you could charge your cell phone and some of your little devices as you're walking. They want you wired all the time, and this is possible. We don't hear enough about this kind of stuff because they want your energy for themselves. The easiest energy to harvest is that of anger. This is why there's so much argument right now. This is why people don't even have conversations, or people who hardly know you feel that they can comment on your life. They feel they can tell you what to do and how you should be doing it. And unfortunately, because of this heavy, thick atmosphere we have of this control, our own friends and family are attacking us and arguing. Not always, not everyone, but you will see this in general. And most people don't know they're doing it. They may think they're just giving a helpful hint, but what they're actually doing is saying what you're doing is wrong. You must do it this way if you want to be part of the tribe. And believe me, you do not want to be part of the tribe. If you want to see what a tribe is doing, come to Canada. It's so bad on reserves, these concentration camps that are still alive today in Canada, that on one night in Attawapiskat, 11 children tried to commit suicide. So the natives are not doing well. The natives that are doing well? Not all of them, of course, because there's a lot of drugs, and they're suffering from generational abuse. Not exactly what they've gone through, but what is in their blood, because it's been gone through before by their elders, by their family. These are the kind of things I have to fight against too, because both sides of the family. I have black, I have native, I have Pick, of all things. Who even knew? Pick. I didn't even know there were those people. But, I'm a little bit digging the little blue face guys. It's awesome. But generations of people who were abused in my line, doesn't matter if it happened to be. This sits on my body. This is why I'm so quick to anger. This is why it's easy to set me off, to trigger me. Unfortunately, and this is for all of us who feel this now, if you allow yourself to be triggered, you are being fed upon like a nice bundled up Happy Meal. These things exist. We must stop pretending they don't. If you really want to see what's out there, sit in the dark, in the pitch black for a while. You will see things. We think what's around us is all this higher vibrational things, and yes, those things exist. But there are things that are lower vibrations that are here and closer, and they want you, and they're feeding off you. This is why things are so negative. The technology that we're dealing with right now on this planet, the majority of it was started by the Nazis. The Nazis who never lost the Second World War. Get that straight right now. They I actually kind of respect what they did. Not exactly the Nazis, of course, but the people that they were working for. They knew that these scientists were brilliant. And instead of just killing all kinds of people, they decided to win hearts and minds. That's where that expression comes from, hearts and minds. And sent their maniacs, their builders of the machines, their bombists, their chemists, to all the nations of the world because they were fought over. Now, we also know that there was a paranormal division. This is true. Now, you've probably heard of things like Der Glocke, but what they almost did, which would have blown Der Glocke to shreds, they would have had their 1,000 years, they would have had their 10,000 years. What they were building, or trying to put up there, was a satellite to project the sun on Earth, like a laser. And they would just blow people up, set them on fire. You say no, then you're dead. They almost had it. They were within 5 years of that. We're lucky. We got lucky. The other thing they did that we haven't talked about enough, and I'll have to do another whole Nazi show because these guys were stoned out of their minds. First, they tested certain drugs on their own people, not just the Jews, but their own people. And they made millions of pills per month. So this is where crack came from. They made a combination called D9 that we have to talk about because this stuff, this is how these guys could march for 4 days without sleep or eating, and then they had no feeling. It also killed empathy. We'll do a whole show and we'll talk about the drugs. These guys were drugged up. These were the first super soldiers. They were completely without thought, except they were brilliant. But again, no empathy. So they're sitting here, sniffing this stuff, going, you know what I want to make? Bring me 10 Jews and those Polish people. I know, it's not funny, but they were some stoned. They did a combination of liquid cocaine and, oh yeah, I'll tell you all about it. We'll do a whole show on it, but they were stoned. The drugs that are on the streets right now are from them. They were actually, in general, made by the Japanese at first. Then the Nazis, after they took the drugs, got smarter and meaner and horrifically cold, and they synthesized them and made them exact. These guys, well, United States tried to make an answer to that. That's where bennies come from, because there was one group of men that they tested the bennies on, and those guys did the same kind of incredible feats of physical endurance. So, this has been a big setup right from the beginning. Now, when I was a kid, I really tuned into the whole Holy Week thing. Now, aside from Christmas, it seemed to be the only time of the year when there was an actual story being told, a compelling focus for all the ritual and sermonizing that you had to put up with for the rest of the year. So I'm talking about Sunday school, met in the chapel for much of Lent, right into Easter, because I had to go. And the chapel was like a secret, a hidden little mini church in which the kids ruled. But there was something else that struck me about Holy Week, there were these little vent windows in the stained glass displays, and they were usually left open since the chapel tended to be warm. And I would sit by the window and take in the intoxicating and somewhat pagan wholeness of spring. Although they missed, or at least got rid of the sexuality of it and forgot why they were celebrating friggin' spring, because there's budding and there's everything's, kind of rubbing up against each other. But when I was a kid, I spent most of my time outdoors, often exploring the woods behind our neighborhood. I walked to school most of the times. I tuned into the sights and the sounds and perhaps most importantly, the smells of the natural world in a way adults are incapable of, I think. Especially now, we don't listen to our bodies at all, and we certainly do not listen to what else is out there. I was able to process all this sensory input in a way I would never be able to again, because everything was rich, and it was new, and it was unknown, and it was alive. And you weren't quite so afraid of everything. You go out and play until the cold hurt your hands, or until the street lights came on, depending on. I may be the last generation who was able to enjoy this in this kind of society because people have gone so nuts. But Easter is also a story of resurrection, a story that long predates Christianity. It's probably one of the oldest stories that we have, but it's also the story of the dead. It's interesting, I forgot to mention something when I was talking about the Holy Fool. One of the oldest recorded images of our symbols is a question mark, except the question mark is a symbol of death as well. And as we know, there can be no life without death. So I'm not looking at this as good or bad. I'm just saying with one, there must be another. I understood the resurrection story, its power, its emotional appeal. When I was young, I lost someone very close to me, my great uncle. He died actually pretty violently. Happened 3 days after Christmas. And just because fate is at heart a effing sadist, things like this happen. In many ways, my childhood died for the first time at that moment. And I've spent much of my time trying to crawl it back ever since. Special people touched by gods, even adults, recommend the power of this man's charisma, his natural charm, a born leader. People fell in behind him. But most of all, he was a genuinely good person who understood his power over others and didn't try to exploit it. His death tore a hole through my family. Things I took for granted were going to change. Something important was going to be taken away from me. So his death wasn't just a single event, a single tragedy. It was a focal point in time. It was to have repercussions for all my human ecosystem. this haunted my dreams for years. You know how it is. You lose someone and they return to you in your dreams, and this is important because we're being haunted in our dreams right now because we have lost control of our dreams. So this is when we are fed upon. It's important. So a story of a charismatic young man rising from the dead, returning to his friends and family, had a tremendous resonation for me. Add the magic of springtime, which you have to be blind, deaf, dumb, and I don't know what other things you have to be to not notice how beautiful this world is. And yes, I see its beauty. I see the trees, and I see that they are the representation of the entire universe, of our physical bodies. They are majestic. They are beautiful. They are also being killed. I see both at the same time. But the magic of spring, which promises a bouquet of baseball and Cheap Trick records, remember? Boys, girls at one point. And you're looking at a mixture for medieval alchemists would have sold their souls to replicate the power of that majesty, the power of the majesty of spring. There are lots of theories about the Easter story. It's just a rewriting of the passions of a pagan fertility god. You dress it up, you put a cross on it, and there you are, Christian. A double died on the cross, or death was fake. It was a mass hallucination. Jesus' ghost appeared to the apostles, plus the old standby, aliens, ghosts, demons. And I'm not going to litigate on the debate here. It's beside the point, because the Easter story spoke and speaks to generations of people who experience loss, and more than anything, wish that loss could be undone. Whether it's a loss of a person, or a loss of your innocence, or the loss of this beautiful earth all around us, death has insinuated itself back into my human ecosystem. I can feel its presence, like many of us do right now, and it feels like it had entered into a holding pattern overhead. I don't know what. This could be a false death, or a false dawn, since death has taken a number of trophies since I started to feel this. Nearly all far too young in age. So I know a bit about death, way more than I'd like to, but I also know that death is a functionary to living man. I know that something of the human existence or essence keeps on trucking. You burn a piece of paper, it doesn't go away, it becomes smoke. It becomes the dust. It becomes this thing billowing in the wind. It becomes heat, which goes on forever and ever. We'll be right back. You're listening to TraceElements. Welcome back, everyone. So, I was talking about being surrounded by the not quite dead. Because that's mostly what people are right now. They don't really engage with themselves. They, of course, will engage to argue, because that energy is being eaten and you're being pushed to argue and to fight for no reason whatsoever, really. But this is a special time of the year. And there's probably, I don't know, it's not the selling point here, but the pitch was that if you believe the story, your dead sons would one day return to you. This was the Jesus story, etc. For most of human history, pretty much every family in Christendom, the world, were pining for a dead son. Like most of the world is living in the apocalypse right now. We are as well, but majority of people don't really notice it. And we must talk about sacrifice. Because one of the things the Christian apologists have to contend with while debating their new system into legitimacy was the extreme antiquity of the divine sacrifice motif. Indeed, it's probably right up there with the great cosmic tree of human belief. A divine being sacrifice. And typically dismemberment, I don't know why. Some sort of vivisection is always involved. Being integral to a proper function of creation is sufficiently widespread to be considered universal. There's a hypothesis that the dragon, monster, titan, whatever you want to call the old ones, a dismemberment and subsequent building of the universe out of its component parts is where these things start. Always. Another way of saying is that Jesus is Tiamat's grandson, because these myth themes explore aspects of the same spectrum of sacrifice, a skin in the game. As many in it inevitably describes it in a piece about sacrifice. I'm going to read you an excerpt from Pieces of 8. It's really good. The spirit world quickly becomes fascinated by sacrifice, probably because it is a rarely observed event. Almost no other creature does it, and those that do are alarmingly intelligent, approaching human, in their use of language, symbolic thinking, such as corvid, octopus, elephant. Sacrifice is fascinating because it is a topological rearrangement of the universe, either in its material form, burnt offerings, ritual murder, etc., or in its temporal form, fasting, sexual abstinence, etc. Rearranging the topology of the universe is almost by definition a godlike power, given that it is probably how the whole enchilada was created in the first place. To echo or mimic that certainty, a good way of getting attention. Sacrifice is the fundamental psychological effect that builds all human culture because it is the removal of now for a future payoff, which again goes back to slavery. Because the only way you can hope for something is because now is so terrible that you know your life is always going to be like this. And you will hope that someday in the future someone will give you something that will make this hell end. Now, whether in wealth or food or song, recall, or reliable shelter, or present-day enjoyment of princesses, maybe, this is cosmologically huge, rarely observed among any other non-human person. It is reasonable to posit that just this delayed gratification was part of the first extra-dimensional exchange with whatever appeared at the campfire's edge, because in the nighttime, you see stuff. Not just because you're afraid of the dark, but fear is important. Fear can make you stronger, make you run faster, make you sharp. But unfortunately, if you stay in fear for a long time, you get slow, stupid. This is where most humans are right now, because we can't exist with this kind of stress. But it seems to me one of the things we would all want individually, squared away in our heads, is whether or how sacrifice to an external entity is either quantitatively, qualitatively different to the emergence of delayed gratification in one's own development. Because there is a lot to play for. The Easter motif, again, explores the ultimate today-tomorrow payoff. Because we are not living in the now. We're living more what happened yesterday, what's going to happen tomorrow. We hope that the future will be brighter, but it can't be, because we are creating the future right now. But anyway, we are looking for a payoff, which performed correctly leads to immortal life. It's little wonder that it is traditionally preceded by a long period of fasting, which if we had kept up, and it may be one of the few things in religions that's absolutely true, if we had kept this up, we wouldn't have gotten sick. Certainly not be the fat, sugary Happy Meals that we are today. Now, taking an unlicensed psychoanalytic approach, can say it also maps the appearance of a delayed gratification in childhood development. Turns out mastery of delayed gratification is amongst the best, if not the best, predictor of future success. Can you wait? Do you have to have it now? But unfortunately, most people aren't thinking that far. And there's a slight danger, again. One of the cornerstone concepts, I guess, of human psychology, stretching back to about 1 million years ago, with particular late capitalist interpretation, the Protestant work ethic, evidence-free claims of something else that needs to go away, that sacrifice, in the sense of delayed gratification, is what we might call necessary, but not sufficient. In any case, it seems an excellent time of year to think about the sacrifice motif, its implications, particularly if you have not overindulged in the goodies and the chocolate and are idly wondering if it's somehow not too late to start on Lent once again. Because these things are important. And they were done for a reason. Now look at sacrifice and its discontents. Exchange, extra-dimensional exchange mechanism. Because again, we are talking about the exchange that's going on right here, right now, as we speak. Now from the Gospel of Mary, Peter said to him, "Since you have explained everything to us, and everything to use, tell us also, what is the sin of the world?" The Savior said, "There is no sin, but you create sin when you mingle as in adultery, which is called sin. That is why the good came to be with you, to enter the essence of each nature, and to restore it to its roots." He continues, "That is why you become sick and die. For you love what deceives you. Whoever understands should understand. Mingling as in adultery, is a fairly potent descriptor of trapping your consciousness in the labyrinth of the material world, or the labyrinth of this overly mechanized world. Mingling. And straight from the mouth of a guy who never actually existed, there is no other sin. The entire thing hinges on consciousness and where we point it. I want to unpack a bit more. So we're going to be required to perform an overlap analysis. First, there is Graham Hancock's description of the actual purpose of physical existence. It is deceptively simple, and I'm a little jealous of its stark reality. We come here to learn consequences. His example was to try and burn your hand in a dream. You can't do it. But you can be aware that it is a thing that can happen. Division, even if only for the chance of union, must presumably remain academic until we come here and try it, I guess. But when I heard him say that, it mapped perfectly to my own experience of the non-physical. It is one of those innocuous, almost throwaway phrases that sets off an entire kindergarten of sparklers in my mind. You will no doubt have noticed there is a fascinating lack of comprehension on the part of the world that is non-physical, that is around us every single day. That it could just be our own very physical problems. I'm sick, I'm poor, I'm lonely. That it fascinates them like the unburnt hand in the dream. There's no frame of reference for many of these concepts. This may provide a reasonable method for understanding just how rarely extra-dimensional assistance is of any use to us. Second place I want to overlay is something that Ian said on Deeper Down the Rabbit Hole at the beginning of this year. I heard it on the Eurostar and had rattling around my head for a very long time. It was quite distracting. But what Ian said was that the spirits are fascinated when we deny ourselves something. Brain sparklers again. Because, like consequences, a lack of something is difficult to experience in the non-physical. I put it to you that these two observations are intimately related and simply describe different parts of one continuous spectrum. If Ian is correct, and his experience appears to match my own, then in the case of sacrifice, the non-physical recipients are fed not by the things they accrue, but by the things we deny ourselves. The argument that spirits are fed on energy of food or other sacrifices is weak. If it were so, why would they wait for you to pour out a little rum when they could just haunt the biscuit aisle at Tesco and feed themselves like some ghost robbing a convenience store? But I think they are taking something else, and that there are beings actually feeding us. But nevertheless, they do seem to require our assistance to open the biscuit packet, don't they? In fact, it's critical, and as Jason regularly points out, offerings are a cornerstone to a practice of magic. To me, this implies that the awareness of lack could be our major problem. You know, we're told that everything around us is energy, that we are energy. Then how could we lack anything energetic? Think about it. How could we really run out of something? We can't run out of something. So they've given this idea of lack for something else. I think the image of lack in our consciousness is the actual sacrifice, the actual currency that is exchanged between the physical and the non-physical. Sacrificing a beast would be a very big deal for some European peasant back in the Dark Ages, because it was very likely her family's meat for the month. But if it's chickenness that the spirits are after, then why don't you just burn down a battery, egg farm, and win the lottery later that day, if you were making a deal? Note that it fits really perfectly with the neo-Magnonian hypothesis that extra-dimensional phenomenon, particularly unexplained aerial phenomenon, function as the consciousness control mechanism. They don't want a church. They want us to build them a church. Which explains why whoever was really and truly controlling the Nazi didn't want to just kill everybody. They wanted our hearts and minds, and they wanted us to build them some things. Satellites, technology, the things that are constantly entertaining us to death right now. That the trading floor for extra-dimensional exchange is consciousness. There are a number of inevitable hypotheses that tumble out of this conclusion. Fasting. As repeatedly documented, intermittent fasting has altered, my experience of the non-physical too. And the fact is that it is integral to almost the whole world's spiritual process. Pythagoras, Lent, Ramadan, Homer, shamanism, vision quest, etc. But what is fasting? But consciously denying ourselves something, consciously experiencing lack, which is rare in our overfed, over-entertained existence. But more importantly, why is it that meditation, simply sitting and watching your thoughts or breathing in and out, literally resets every aspect of your life and health for the better? And why aren't we doing it? Is this keeping the trading floor clean, open, uncorrupt? Could it be? The notion that consciousness and what we choose to focus on is the entire mechanism of the extra-dimensional exchange going on here. It may offer at least an understanding of why our superabundant, materialistic, incredibly predatory culture is so dangerous to spiritual advancement without resorting to a dreary, cabalist, suspicion of pleasure. Are you just mingling? Are you adulterously mingling? Now, extending that point, it might be, how this planet super rich have functioned as archons. We'll come back to that. Time for a long break. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to TraceElements Radio. And please, if you have time, come to my webpage and take a look and sign up if you like, and it keep you informed about what I'm doing and news articles and things like that. Since I'm trying not to engage in the constant arguing and fighting that's going on right now, and I would suggest that you don't get involved either. So extending the point I was saying, it might as well be how the planet's super rich have always functioned as archons, because they have set up an artificial vision of perpetual abundance, lack, encountered in the spiritual realms and every other one. It is an artificial heaven that makes you forget where you came from in the first place. It is why you cannot fit a camel through the eye of a needle. It is why the realm of the gods is, according to H.H., the Dalai Lama, one of the trickiest incarnations for spiritual progression. Now, such an idea can be easily extended down to the subatomic level, where phenomena like quantum observation indicate that consciousness and the control and manipulation of it literally underpin the entire manifest world. The one who controls the spice controls the world. And if the spice is oil, or the spice is consciousness, or the spice is you as a battery, we are being harvested. And whether we live in a prismatic hologram or not, the implication is that the mind war is not only completely real, but a perpetual second-by-second Ragnarok. But such imperial resistance may well be the only real thing. We can extend this back to previous yogas, out to the entire universe. If the lunar and Martian anomalies were remains of some presumably long vanished civilization, do you think they were perfect? Do you think there's a perfect place here with people living in it? From what I've heard from people who actually go around and look at tiny little uncontacted tribes, there is no perfect place. That what we have learned very, very well on planet Earth is for one group to use another group. It doesn't matter if they're melanin dominant or not. One group usually dominates and steals from another, and this is what we've learned very well. Benevolent beings? Or do you think they suffered through polluting of their consciousness via twerking, or whatever Martian version of Cardassian wedding was? There is a final component to the consciousness exchange hypothesis. This is how the neighbors appear to us. Take, for instance, showing up as beings from stars. Why? In an extra-dimensional hypothesis, the notion that these beings are from out in the black is simultaneously true and false. Yes, they may be from a different part of this prismatic hologram, which may be technically impossible when you think about it, but they appear here via an extra-dimensional travel, a channel. You see how it makes no difference if Olympus is in the center of a hologram or not? But to say they are from the stars, to appear as such, is a pointer, like angels appearing with wings, which are patently not required for aerial mobility. It is so that we think in a certain way. It casts our minds out into a bigger context, as if to say, you are part of a story that is much, much, much larger than wherever your daughter may marry the farmer from over the next rise. Or all of this happened before. Or all of this is happening, and all of what is happening is extending across all the realms and all the times. Yours is here in the physical and also out in the non-physical, which for the night sky is a better metaphor for extra-dimensional in the minds of our Neolithic ancestors, say, than string theory. The metaphor, though, remains functional, remains active. By the way, even if we know the story, the story it tells is all nonsense. All of it unpacks. When you entangle your consciousness with the night sky, in whatever cultural form most appeals to you, as above, so below, Implementing a consciousness exchange hypothesis would imply not sacrificing to any old thing that shows up with sparkles and demands you to do it, being extremely selective in where and to whom your sacrifices are going, taking control for your own lack, fasting, meditation, for instance, again, like the previous point, ensure that they occur at proper times. Drink from a deeper well. If it is the change in consciousness that underpins your connection to the source, do you think you should be dousing it with television, leaving outside possible government brain entrainment for the moment, and all the other beings that are quite literally working to siphon your energy? How does it all work? How does candle magic and rishi and astronauts witnessing craft in space and sacrificing chickens to Orisha, pouring milk into a hole for the dead, and remote viewing and Bigfoot and cursing all seem to be effective things that happen? Could it be that there's an ongoing system of exchange in which the currency is the change and the manipulation of human and presumably other consciousness says? And it is these changes in consciousness that give shape to the physical world. Consider this psi theory and tell me it doesn't look like the theater of main conflict in this mind war. Now, according to the theory of first sight, we normally use what I'll refer to as secondary perception, which is using our five senses to experience and interact with the world. Secondary perception is far off. It's away. And the most useful way for us to interact with the world. It is so useful, in fact, that we rely on it almost, but not quite, exclusively. We feel things with our hands. We communicate with our voices, ears, hands. We move with our feet. We see with our eyes. We don't try to do these things solely with psychic ability because our ordinary senses are so much better at ordinary interactions. Now, according to Carpenter, psi is more or less an unconscious process that operates all the time. It is impossible to tell our psychic ability stop. We don't know where it ends, and our ordinary perception begins. They blend together seamlessly and beyond our conscious awareness most of the time. This is because of subliminal perception. We are wired to recognize things at an unconscious level before they reach our conscious awareness. Many studies have confirmed this, but there's more to it. Recent studies have shown that we have subliminal recognition. We constantly feel the future before we sense it. A unified theory approaches then that these things are happening, that what we want to call it, this siphoning, that it is happening. So what about abduction then? Because maybe we're yummy. I don't know. It still is another extra-dimensional exchange mechanism. So another list of rigorous, uptight researchers continues to shrink rather than grow. But David Pauloud's name remains near the top. He was on Coast to Coast recently, which means I had him in my ears for a long time. The segment was reasonably timely, as it dovetails with some of Chris Knowles and my discussions about attacks that may have happened, or I may have dreamt them. I'm not sure. But I also don't think it matters if it was real or is not real, because in my mind and in my body they were real, so they affect me. Now, Pauloud's probably needs no introduction, but after more than 2 decades in law enforcement, he became the go-to guy for mysterious human vanishings in national parks. Have you heard about that? I haven't talked about it in a while, but initially in the US, then Canada, and the UK, and Australia, and New Zealand. Really anywhere with the English language specifically, and a broadly similar national park system. His strict methodology benefits a former law enforcement officer, which is one of the reasons why I dig him a little bit. But any case, anyway, might be suicide or going off the grid. He just throws those ones out. Any case that involves someone with mental illness is also discarded. Obviously, any case that could be an animal attack, as evidenced by blood or drag marks, is thrown away. Only cases that occur in national parks are considered. Such rigorousness personally relaxes me. You end up with a data set that can actually yield supportable ideas. Now, regular listeners or readers of my blog, or really just regular non-idiots, will be aware that abduction has been behaviorally associated with mankind, more or less as far back as we can remember. Whether it be demons or fairies or trolls or spirits or greys, people get mysteriously vanished all the time, from their beds, from their homes, from their vehicles, or with their vehicles, like MH370, Bermuda Triangle, etc. This means that you will be aware that the best, or the most, or at least the most famous example of an extra-dimensional explanation that broadly matches my interpretation of this research is that of Travis Walton, who Paulides mentions on Coast to Coast. They both know each other. So we'll return to Walton. But this is not an explanation that we can do very much with. It's really more of a trajectory of research. For instance, there are some interesting data about the dream sleep states, brainwaves, and various neurochemicals that might tell us something interesting about how many of the bed-based encounters might work. This is why I'm telling you it's very important that you start paying attention to what's going on with you when you sleep. For instance, before you go to bed, to make sure you're not watching something horrible on TV or bloody, or that your mind is going over your stuff from the day. You must separate your day from bedtime. There must be a distinct difference. You must give time for your sleep. You must take control of your brain because if you're not, something else is. I know it sounds weird, but Nick Renfield speculated that certain conscious states might trigger holographic projections, that sort of thing. I'm leaning more towards they're just waiting for you. And there's probably a lot of value in pursuing these lines of hypothesis, but they simply cannot help us. For instance, a 3-year-old vanishes in seconds from under the eyes of his parents, only have his remains found 3/4 of a mile up what is effectively a cliff 4 years later. Now, Paulides was on Coast to Coast to promote a Kickstarter for his Missing 411 film. If it comes off, I get a t-shirt. Contribute. It's a good one. Anyway, you can read the story of Jared Aturito, I think, reference in the trailer, anyway, David's website. I want to expand on a number of its aspects, though. The initial search and rescue operation appears to have been deliberately scuttled. The SAR officers used Gerald's father's clothing rather than Jared's to give the dogs a scent. Then they threatened Mr. Adadiro. When he became angry over this, key information such as 3 fishermen who were the last to see Jared alive was kept from the parents for days. Midway through the second week, Mr. Arturo got a mysterious phone call from inside the sheriff's office saying that he wasn't being told everything, and that the caller hoped that he would find out the truth one day. And you can hear the piece in the trailer. Jared's remains, such as they were found 4 years later. They were 2 miles away, 500 feet up from the last evidence of the kid being alive. From the website, is what it says. 4 years dragged on till hikers were 500 feet above the Big South Trail, over 2 miles from the trailhead. When they were scattered, they found scattered clothing. Larimer County Sheriff was notified. Deputies went to the scene, found the remains that were consistent with Jared. Allen was called, and this time they escorted him down the trail to point to the remains. Allen said that it was very, very steep and rocky incline, where 2 SAR workers helped him up the mountain. Allen stated that he was taken to an area where they showed him the area was where the sweatpants were found, but the clothing was already removed from the mountain. He was taken to another location where Jared's shoes were found. Allen made it a point to say that it didn't appear to him that the shoes had been through the elements for 4 winters. The shoes were clean, The colors were vibrant. The searchers found the sweater that Jared was wearing, some unusual hairs around the neckline. Crime scene technicians found the top of his skull and one tooth in the general area, but no other bones were found. Days after finding Jared's remains, the sheriff had a press conference. They had the clothing and the shoes on display, covered with plastic, and Alan noticed that someone had pulled the pants to the display, then right side out, straightened out one of the legs to the sweatpants, asked the sheriff why they did that. The sheriff asked him what he meant. Alan told him that when they were found, they were inside out. The sheriff asked him how he knew that. Alan stated that he was at the scene. The sheriff claimed ignorance to the pant issue, left the displays as they were. Let me state right here, finding young boys' pants turned inside out on the side of a mountain is weird, unusual. The sheriff had to have known this, thus straightened them out. One of Jared's tooth, was located sitting on the top of a bed of needles in plain view, a very, very unusual sight. After 4 winters, you'd expect the tooth to be under the needles, buried in debris. Now, at the press conference, the sheriff stated that he wasn't positive what happened to Jared. He thought it was possible that a mountain lion killed him, but there wasn't significant evidence to support that. Now, the sheriff sent the tooth and the top of the cranium to Colorado Bureau of Investigation for DNA analysis. They also sent all of the clothing to the Bureau to locate blood. They didn't find any blood on the clothing. CBI stated that the cranium had degraded DNA, causing an 85% return. But a DNA expert from Ohio told Alan at a later date that the tooth was contaminated with more than one person. Well, with more than one person's DNA, anyway. Personally, I have no idea what they mean. All DNA experts know that you cleanse the item prior to testing to eliminate any contamination. The sheriff also sent the hair that they collected off of Jared's collar to the lab. They told Alan that the hairs were non-human and not mountain lion, and not to worry about it. They never gave Alan the hair report. They never told him who the hair or what the hair belonged to. Think this through. You are an investigator. You're attempting to understand what killed a small boy. Wouldn't you want to know what those hair belong to? The hair. The fiber experts know exactly what every animal hair looks like. They have a guide to every hair in the wilderness, and it's their job to know them, to match them. Why wasn't this completed? Why wasn't Alan given a copy of the hair report? He was given the DNA report and every other imaginable report but that one. He still doesn't have it. Jared's skull cap was found sitting on a log, and a single tooth was found sitting on a pile of pine needles, which is about as unusual as finding a pristine shoe 4 years in a Colorado winter. Whatever it is, it's not some sort of sleep paralysis here, some holographic projected interdimensional portal. And here's where Paul's rigorous methodology is so helpful. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. You're listening to TraceElements Radio. And I want to ask a question. Present an idea. I'm not even sure how to say it. Something's going on to us, and they know. whatever it is. It's not a hologram. It's not a hallucination. There's something literally happening. And something also that's happening with considerable more frequency inside of national parks than any other wilderness or urban or rural area. A standard extra-dimensional explanation would not allow for politically created map lines to impact their overall spread, right? Neither would the explanation that cases increase in areas of isolation, as most national parks are significantly more crowded in peak season other than wilderness areas. From memory, half of Paulide's cases come from Yosemite alone. So, I've got a graph in my head. Thinking process when encounters the missing 411's database. All cases can be explained, or at least one case cannot be explained. Something is going on. What happens to the underreported known unknowns? They're similar to how Jacques Levy describes the uneven data set of UFO encounters in UFOs, the Psychic Solution. Strangeness, category 1. You see a flickering light as you come out of the garage. It reminds you of a firefly, but you have never observed fireflies under quite similar conditions. Result, you are unlikely to call the police or the Air Force to report this. If you tell someone about the sighting, it will probably be a friend, an associate. I didn't know there were fireflies this time of year. Strangeness category 2. And these are just random categories. I made them up, basically. So, strangeness category number 2. As you come out of the garage, you see a flaming object that plunges behind the hill. Perhaps you have read somewhere that meteors and fireballs often appear quite close when they are in fact hundreds of miles away. However, you call the police to report it because the summer has been very dry and you are afraid the phenomenon, whatever it is, might cause something to catch fire. Category 3, strangeness. You put your car away. You come out of the garage in time to see a luminous object giving off a blue glow that plunges behind the hill. It looks like a large circular aircraft and seems to have some windows, but no tail, no wings. Could it be the Russians are coming? You call the nearest Air Force base to report it out of feeling civically dutiful, or whatever. Strangeness category 4. You park the old Chevy by the side of the barn, and as you walk towards the house, you suddenly see a large disc with lighted portals that comes down with a gentle rocking motion, touches the ground near the pen where the pigs are kept. It makes a humming sound that turns into a high-pitched whistle. It takes off again. You think of calling in the police, but it occurs to you that the neighbors would be intrigued, and the story will be all over the town the next day, and you realize the Air Force might be interested, but you think better of it when your wife tells you she read an article in a magazine explaining how the Air Force paid some big university to study those things, and it came out negative. On the other hand, Joe down the street has a lot of books on the subject and gets a little journal from a private UFO group in Indiana. Perhaps he would pass along the information to them. This way you could at least tell somebody what you just saw and you don't have to worry about being ridiculed. Strangeness category 5. As you lock the garage to make sure no vandals will scratch the paint, on the new ship, Chevrolet, you suddenly confronted by a dwarf wearing a silvery, shining suit. It has no arms, but its oversized eyes glow in a strange orange light. It turns around, walks stiffly into the bushes. A moment later, a round object takes off from behind the hedge. At first, you are too shocked to move, but then you come to your senses, go into the house, you tell your wife, you don't feel like going on a camping trip the next weekend. She wants to know why, and you reluctantly tell her what you just seen, and after she promises not to tell your mother because you're crazy. Strangeness category 6. You're lying in bed wondering if there's enough gas left in the car to drive to church and back tomorrow. Suddenly a light appears, and you get the idea. What do you see? What do you say? What do you know? Many examples of most cases have happened, and in different categories would be given. Sighting of a strangeness 4, 5, 6 are especially interesting, but witnesses of these sightings will report it only to someone you trust, and hardly ever to anyone else. Why national parks? One thought is that they often encompass what could be called a window area. Certainly, most of New Zealand's national parks encompass tapu land. The problem with this is a singular explanation is that more tapu locations fall outside national parks than inside of them. Also, there's plenty of window areas. The Mothman in Point Pleasant, for instance, that weren't national parks, but certainly valuable to check indigenous mythology, as they may indicate relevant historic patterns. However, the overlay of national parks and sacred sites maps is too noisy to be satisfactory. Plus, I'll admit, my American history is not up to scratch, but I'm pretty sure there were no First Nation stories describing Yosemite as Hellmouth, portal crossing, controlled areas, basically. But it strains credulity to think these cover-up spans Australia, New Zealand, and UK and Canada. They are all Five Eyes country, to be sure. But I bet actual money, there's a reason the data falls more into these countries than, say, China, Brazil, and I think it's just down to language. A globe-spanning national park cover-up doesn't really work, if you ask me. I don't know. Something is absolutely going on. And what if he's right? That national parks, could this happen, are controlled status. Arbitrary map marks is a determining factor for reasons that are ickier. That someone else knows that they are hunting them. Sharks, like all predators, are a mix of laziness and opportunism, right? When we would go diving in Solomon's Islands, people would, the mouth of some sort of lagoon. On the outside, they hang around the channel, with their mouths open, feeding on whatever floated past. If you dig a channel closer to the village, they show up. More food, less swimming. Change the rules of the biosphere, and you change the pattern of the predation. Something is preying on us, and what if we are in some way property or food? In tribal societies, if people vanished in a particular valley, it would be declared off limits. If you are an entity doing the vanishing, Like any other predator, you change your hunting grounds. Let's say you snatch a kid or two from a national park. People keep coming, so you do it again. And then the FBI and Park Service sets in because they don't want to panic people or simply admit that something is going on. So more people come. You return to Walton. Whatever happened to him happened outside a national park, and he was returned. In fact, when you consider the famous UFO cases of abduction or serious encounters, they tend to come back. This may be a factor. This may be a variant of the known unknowns. Habitat changes, unpredictable effects on predation. You need to look at London's urban fox phenomenon, or its parrots, and see how rules of extra-dimensional engagement might be inadvertently changed. Those signs at the beach that read, "Do not feed the seagulls," exist for a good reason. What if that's what they're doing? You tell me. I think there's something going on, and it is known that we are being harvested. Now, with this going on, right in front of our faces, and I'm saying we're being eaten, the other things going on. The Game of Thrones, choice of theaters, and more NSC shakeups. As the reality show version of Game of Thrones continues to play out in the Oval Office, the world lurches closer to another world war. Where to begin, keeping score of the incredible developments that have unfolded over the past couple weeks? Let's go briefly over a few major headlines that have played out since the end of March. March 30th, both Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations made strong comments indicating that the United States is no longer seeking the ousting of Assad in Syria. Naturally, the usual suspects blasted these actions as tantamount to treason. But at the time, it appeared as though Trump administration had renewed its commitment to détente with Russia. April 3rd, Susan Rice, Barack Obama's national security advisor, was outed for unmasking several Trump transition team officials who were subjected to an incidental surveillance by an intelligence community. While this was far from indicates Trump's claims that Obama wiretapped him, it indicates a key member of the outgoing national security team in actions that could be deemed to have political ramifications. Just how far Trump is willing to push remains to be seen. But it's more of a sort of Damocles handing over this murky fray. April 3rd, also, it was revealed that a former Navy SEAL and Blackwater founder Eric Prince had met in the United Arab Emirates with Russian officials, allegedly to establish a back channel between Trump and Putin. Supposedly, this was to see if Russia could be convinced to withdraw its support from Iran. There's certain merit to this. Yes. Then we have Betsy DeVos, Trump's Secretary of Education, reportedly acting as an unofficial advisor during a transition period. Prince himself and his family also gave generous donations to Trump's election campaign. It's interesting to note that Prince is reportedly close to Trump's infamous chief strategist, Steve Bannon. April 4th, witnesses use of chemical weapons in Syrian town. Almost immediately, Assad is blamed for these attacks carried out by Americans, with Trump abruptly adopting a more militant line concerning Syria. And then the vultures circle. Steve Bannon is removed from the National Security Council April 5th. Bannon, regarded as being one of the most dovish members of Trump's administration in regards to Russia. Reportedly, his power struggle with Trump's son-in-law is becoming a big deal, and that may be the heart of Bannon's removal. Bannon was reportedly denounced Jared Kushner as a globalist. In private, blames him for subverting Trump's policies. April 6th, United States launched airstrikes against Syria for the first time. All previous strikes were allegedly other guys. And while the U.S. gave Russian military personnel forewarning of this, Trump is supposedly, or reportedly, considering military actions that would potentially lead to the deaths of Russian military personnel. Yeah, it's been one heck of a month. All of this unfolds against the backdrop of the ever-increasing military buildup of Eastern Asia, while Trump is meeting with the Chinese president. So there's an absolute era, or how do I even say it, a feeling of terror and pressure. And are we going to wake up and it's going to be World War III tomorrow? Has it already started? Because most of the worlds are acting at this. This is a certain energy. I know it sounds like it's not the same thing, but I'm telling you, this energy is being harvested, and they want us to feel it for a reason. There is no reason to put a failed actor, Trump, who has declared bankruptcy repeatedly, in charge of a nation, in control of the guns. There's no reason for this. Now, clearly, there have been some types of reversal of fortune in Trump's administration. Policy seems to have, shifted to China with Trump's first meeting with Chinese president. Statements made by Tillerson and Haley March 30th seem to mark the end of the U.S. efforts to escalate tensions with Russia, seemingly in participation or anticipation with more hostilities coming from China. And you would be screwed. The world would be screwed. It would be over. You attack China, that's it. We're done. End of freaking discussion. They will beat you like a redheaded stepchild. With the phrase false flag, too, becoming far too casually used lately. The fact is there's absolutely no logical reason for Syria or Russia to engage in the use of chemical weapons at all. Sarin gas, please. What could possibly be gained by such actions? Zionists? I don't know. But guys, what's going on right now is more of a spiritual component. The idiot in charge, he's not in charge. He's just the face. The face in the States is ridiculous, of course. And we were expecting all of these things. There was no way that you were going to get your little orange-faced Trump in there and it'd be okay. There's no way. But he is a buffoon. It was absolutely never going to be okay with this guy. But what I want to ask you, what I think is important, is what is happening behind the scenes? Who is pushing for us to be so stressed? We can't think. We can't make plans. And then we have the returns. There are all kinds of returns going on right now. It's because we are reliving what has happened before and what has been told many times. Back in 1990, the Boston Phoenix ran a review of the first few episodes of Twin Peaks. It's odd. Intentionally so. Contrasting it David Lynch's highly anticipated series with paint by numbers, kind of comedy hours. I didn't really watch the first season, any of Twin Peaks, really. But I've heard it talked about. I had high hopes for the project, having been brain seared 4 years earlier with Blue Velvet. First time I saw it, I had an out-of-body experience, not a pleasant kind. It seemed so disturbingly familiar to me. Frank Booth was like any other dangerous man that floated on the edges of my world. Strange presence. Frank Booth has always reminded me of an all too much of recently released ex-convict guys. Alcoholics following kids or something. The things that are going on right now with our people make no sense. People who are normally rational, that I can sit and have a conversation with, no longer have the ability to do that. It's argument. It's hostility. It's like some dam has been leaking for eons and it's just opened up. That they can no longer talk without fighting. They can no longer discuss. The only thing that I've seen with bringing in Trump is that every conversation now ends with some sort of racial slur. All of the old wounds reopened. And even though most of our brown-skinned brothers are listening to rap that is so derogatory and actually eating their minds, they've missed the fact that their music is killing them. And then we go and see our brothers and sisters in Europe, and they are being killed. These are people who never owned a slave, certainly have never been raised in this land of privilege, but they think they have. So they too are suffering from the same thing everyone else is suffering. Why, then, is this going on? Are we just being fattened up for the slaughter? Because it sure seems like it. We must take our health back, take the night back. And I think we can still do this. Thanks for listening, guys. I know it's been ranty today, but I'm really concerned. And I want us to be okay. Have a nice week, everybody. Bye for now.
you for listening to Revolution Radio.